Well, I tell you what, I'm happy coming in, and I'm gonna tell you why. Before I make other remarks, I was just told Brownwood, for folks that live in Brownwood, as you know, a lot of them were on the old Exxon way back in the day. Exxon fed electricity to Worcester and Brownwood, and so those individuals, they had power. I think they lost power on Thursday evening. They got it back fairly quickly. They had it till Saturday afternoon, and then it was quickly lost again. There was some switching that CenterPoint was trying to do, but the load of that area was too much for the circuit that it was on. So it had to get shut down and repair upstream, outside of basically public right-of-way, had to be assessed, and that was done this morning. And now I think everybody but about 17 homes is returned. Brownwood, I guess, always suffers the most, it seems like. But I'm glad walking in here. I was told they're working on, crews are there trying to look at the 17 homes that may not be without power, maybe for various reasons. Sometimes there's a little bit of damage to electrical box or whatever the case may be. But so I'm glad that most of our cities back online. It's very onesie twosie type right now, if it's a fallen tree or whatever the case may be. But certainly good to see that we're in a week out after pretty much Cat 2 type winds in Baytown, that we were able, first the city, to go and pick up brush and debris or whatever the case may be. We've seen crews all throughout the city, so I'm very proud of that. But certainly that CenterPoint is able to go and amongst basically have to repair their own infrastructure. I think you've seen a lot of the big towers on the other side of town or the other side of the county, but they had infrastructure. Their main building in downtown Houston was damaged, so they were trying to go and get everybody back plus themselves. But at least with the same type of storms or same type of winds that we experienced in Ike, they were able to get most everybody back online. Looks like within 7 days. So we're really close, other than just a handful of folks. But now I want to go and just thank you for being here. I know with Mr. Alamia and the entire emergency management staff that we have, it is great that we have this type of level of professionals that serve us as a city. We've experienced different types of events, and so what we're fastly approaching on is hurricane season, which begins June 1st. June 1st. So we already had our practice run through in Baytown. I'm happy with that. I hope that's it, but if not, I think we're better ready. I think a lot of citizens was like, I've been meaning to cut that tree down, and now I think it was an eye-opening for some of them. But this city is storm ready, and I have 100% full confidence in all our emergency management staff, David Alamia and others. 7 o'clock, the storm came through Baytown pretty much, right? By 9 o'clock, I think we were all assembled at our emergency operations center trying to figure out what are we going to do. Public Works folks were notified. Supervisors were, instructed what to do. So we had a game plan ready to go, ready to roll out very quickly, and that I'm very proud of as a city. So with that, it's always, we're going to prepare everything we can as a city, but then certainly as a community, what are the things that you can do to ensure that you are ready, right? So sometimes it may be making sure your house is secure, having all the documents you need, and getting out of town and heading somewhere where it's safer ground if you're in a low-lying area. Or it could be if you're going to ride the storm out, what are the things you can do to ensure the safety of your home, safety of your family. So with that, I do appreciate everything that's taken place today. I attended the Chambers County this morning, their event with Judge Silva and others, and so that was really good that we know we have a coastal community. We are going to have storms, but we are ready as best we can, and that's what this event today is about. So thank you. Yes, let's give him a hand of applause. We do have a couple of more elected officials here that I just want to recognize. One of our council members, Mike Lester, our former health director, and a county official, Judge Bates. If either of you have any opening remarks you'd like to give, they're prepared. They're ready. Thank you for being here. With that, I'm going to give over our mic and our presentation to Dan Reilly with the National Weather Service, our warning coordinator for the entire region. Dan.
All right, great to see so many out here. I remember seeing the mayor out in the field after the 2023 tornado. So it comes to mind how many of these disasters we've had recently. And Baytown caught really the worst of the last one and the one last year, too, with the tornado moving through Deer Park and Pasadena. So let's go ahead and talk about hurricane season, and I'll be happy to take some questions at the end about hurricanes or the severe weather we just had last week. What we're seeing here is one of the first radar images of a hurricane eye. This is Hurricane Carla making landfall down there along Matagorda Bay. Actually pushed a lot of water up into this area, even though the center tracked well to the south. Keep that in mind. We can get a lot of water pushed up right into Galveston Bay, too, even if the storm is that far south. That's some of the flooding in the Freeport area. Got it. All right. All right. So when is hurricane season? We already heard June 1st, excuse me, nominally June 1st. What this chart shows is how many storms we can have out there for different calendar dates. From May 1st through December 31st. And actually, as we get into later May, you sometimes start to see a storm or two out there, even in late May. Even though it's not June 1st yet, don't be surprised if we get a development out there, at least of a tropical storm. And then things kind of simmer along typically through June and July, really ramp up in August. You see how the slope of that line changes in August? So that's telling us that things typically get active about that time. Sometimes it's like if there's a switch turned and all of a sudden we get a lot of storms. We peak right there around September 12th and 13th in the Atlantic, and then we're on the backside of that peak. If we can get to October, most years we're in better shape because those late season storms tend to be nudged to the east. Texas did have a hurricane landfall as late as October 15th. That was Hurricane Jerry. Back in the 1980s. That's actually the latest Texas landfall of a hurricane on record, October 15th. So we rate the hurricanes based on the wind categories, Cat 1 through Cat 5. The graphic there gives you an idea that Cat 5 is a lot worse than Cat 1, right? But if you dig into the details there, even a Category 1 is no joke. We're talking about sustained winds of 74 to 95 miles per hour. So I can tell you with Hurricane Ike, this was a problem for us. There were people on Galveston Island and other areas saying, Ike's a 2, that doesn't sound bad to me. But if you look at what that actually means, a Cat 2, sustained winds 96 to 110 miles per hour with higher gusts, and a large Cat 2 at that, storm surge flooding at a very, very high level. So the Saffir-Simpson hurricane scale is really a wind scale, really nothing more. It doesn't tell you the whole story. The other thing I want to mention is you may hear the term major hurricane. That's Cat 3 and higher by definition. So we'll come back to that in a minute when we talk about the outlook for the season. Where do hurricanes form? You can plot the sort of genesis points for all the hurricanes dating back even to late 1800s. And you could see many of them form in the Atlantic, but quite a few form right in the Gulf. And I can tell you a lot of our Texas storms form right in the Gulf, and then 2-3 days later, they're making landfall. So the reason I bring that up is now is the time to prepare, not when there's a storm getting going in the Gulf. We don't have enough time to get ready at that point. And you'll hear people talk about the main development region out in the Atlantic and the Caribbean. But if you look at this map, there's a lot of development right in our backyard in the Gulf. So once again, prepare now when we have nothing going on in the tropics. So when things are spinning up, you'll be ready to go. Now here's a plot showing the landfalling Category 4 and 5 hurricanes just since 2017. There have been 8, Cat 4 and 5. Now remember, those are the highest, most intense hurricanes that we can have. And there have been 8 of them, remarkably, since 2017, many of those along the Gulf Coast. And you could see here in Baytown, we missed these, but we're bracketed on the left by Harvey. That came in as a Category 4 down near Rockport. And then on the right by Hurricane Laura. We all remember Laura. Laura was directed at Texas. It turned as forecast, fortunately for us, and curled in near the Louisiana-Texas border. But this is kind of eye-opening. There's been more of these Cat 4 and 5 landfalls in the last 6 years than the previous 61 years. So think about that. There seems to be more and more of these, the most intense hurricanes, and many of these actually intensify rapidly over the Gulf. So this is our biggest fear, that we'll have a high category storm coming into our area without a lot of time to prepare. Along the same lines, take a look at this. These are our nation's Category 5 landfalling hurricanes. There haven't been many, just a handful. So we're talking about Andrew, the Labor Day hurricane of 1935, Camille, a very famous Gulf Coast hurricane back in the late 60s, and Michael in 2018. And what I want to point out here is none of these were hurricanes 3 days prior. So they came in as a Category 5, but none of them were even a hurricane 3 days prior. So point is, they can develop quickly and move in quickly. So get prepared before the season. That way you can act quickly if need be. Same idea here. This is just a collection of the major hurricanes landfalling in Texas since 1960. Now, these are all from a website. You can actually go there and perform a search like you want. You can actually say, show me all the hurricanes within 50 miles of Baytown since, 1920. Anything like that you can do and create these maps. This happens to be for the state of Texas, Category 3 and higher. And you can see there's really no part of the Texas coast that is immune. These are some of the greatest impacts that we've had over the years, really dating back to Carla back in 1961. Now, I did a talk in Chambers County this morning, as the mayor mentioned. And so for this search, I used Anahuac. And, we could do the same for Baytown. Show me all the Cat 3 or greater hurricanes, major hurricanes, since 1900 within 60 miles. And it's kind of interesting to see the clustering there on the west end of Galveston Bay. What are we looking at there? The 1900 hurricane. You all have read about this storm, probably are familiar with it. Our nation's greatest natural disaster, the 1900 Galveston hurricane. And then what's amazing is after that storm, the people of Galveston raised the island on the Gulf side from about just above sea level to 17 feet at the seawall area. And they built the seawall. And it's a good thing they did, because there were major hurricanes in 1909 and 1915, really close on the heels of that initial one. Notice also Hurricane Alicia there back in 1983. How many of y'all were here for Alicia in 83? So you remember that. That's a good example of a Gulf developing storm. It formed off the coast of Louisiana from some thunderstorms, and then came in as a Category 3 major hurricane just 2 days later. So that's the kind of storm we worry most about. Now, it looks like there's some gap there, and that's really just by chance. And, of course, Hurricane Ike came right in the middle of that gap. So you may be wondering why Ike wasn't on that map. Ike was a Category 2, technically. It wasn't quite a Category 3, but just 5 miles per hour wind below that Cat 3 level. So as far as I'm concerned, it was a major hurricane. And you can see the radar loop there of Hurricane Ike. You can see the track there in the upper right of this hurricane, this very, very large hurricane. And I can tell you at the weather office, there was a challenge messaging this. We were saying, this is a large, dangerous hurricane. This is life-threatening. And we had some folks at the coast that refused to leave, and they didn't really fully understand what we were looking at. So as far as the wind goes, it's a Category 2. Remember, that's up to 110 miles per hour with higher gusts. As the mayor mentioned, with these thunderstorms, we were pushing some of those wind speeds, perhaps even there. But the storm surge was going to be more like a Category 4. On the old scale, 10 to 15 feet of seawater above ground. You can't survive that. So, I remember that very well. You can see it's approaching the west end. It takes a little curve to the right at the last minute, takes it over Galveston Bay. Now, that actually is very important for Baytown, because had it kept on its original track, say 20 miles to the left of where it came in, that would have put Baytown squarely on the right-hand side of the track, and that would have allowed a lot more seawater to push in from Galveston Bay. So our surge, based on our modeling, probably would have been 4 or 5 feet higher than it was. So the water we had, you just add 4 or 5 feet of seawater, and so it was certainly bad. There's no question about it in terms of wind impacts and surge, but it could have been even worse. Every storm is different. Thinking, how many of y'all were here for Ike in 2008? A lot of the same folks that were here for Alicia as well. We remember Ike very well. Storm surge, high winds, power outages for a long duration. Harvey, totally different storm for us. Now, for the folks down the coast in Rockport, it was a Category 4 hurricane. It came in with a lot of wind and damage that way. But for us in Baytown, we didn't get the wind part of the hurricane, but we did get a tremendous amount of heavy, heavy rain. And so for Harvey, it was all about the flooding rain. There were some tornadoes as well with Harvey. For Ike, it was all about high winds and storm surge. Every storm is different, is the bottom line here. Of those hazards, what is the most deadly? It's going to be your storm surge flooding, followed by the flooding from heavy rain. And so there's an old adage when it comes to emergency management and evacuations, and that is run from the water, hide from the wind. And this is where that comes from. If you're in a storm surge zone, and it's our job to let you know how bad the surge is going to get, if you're expecting storm surge flooding in your area, you really need to get out of harm's way, and then come back after, because it is just so dangerous. Flooding rain is harder to get a handle on, right? It's not going to be just at the coast. It can be well inland. It depends where that heavy rain falls. And if you look at the fatalities from wind, 8%. So all hazards can be deadly, but it really is the storm surge. It is the water-related hazards, I should say, that produce about 90% of the fatalities. Where do you find these surges, these hazards, rather, in the hurricane? So this is a snapshot of Hurricane Ike sitting right over Galveston Bay. Baytown is going to be in the eye of this hurricane. Did anyone ride the storm out here in Baytown? We got quite a few people. I was down the way in League City, working the storm. And so for any of you that happen to go out during the eye passage, very calm, eerily calm in that center area in the eye. The ring around the eye, that's where the highest winds are. That's called the eye wall. So before the advent of satellite radar, before people really understood hurricanes, there were times when folks would go through these high winds, and then the winds would die down, and they would think, okay, the storm is over, only to find that the winds pick up just as strong from the other direction after the eye passes. It's this ring around the eye where you find the highest winds in the hurricane. So if you get the eye wall, you get the high winds. If you miss the eye wall, you miss the high winds. Also, notice I kind of highlighted some spiral bands coming out from the center. That's where you can find tornadoes and very heavy rain and gusty winds as well. So if you think back to Harvey, we missed the eye wall, therefore we missed the really high winds, but what did we get? We got the spiral bands on the right-hand side. So we got the tornadoes, the very heavy rain, and the flooding. Let's talk now about storm surge risk. How are we looking in Baytown? Are we at risk from storm surge flooding? And so first off, I'm showing kind of a worst case Category 5 threat area along the entire Gulf Coast. And all the areas shaded there have some sort of storm surge risk. But let's zoom in on this region. And of course, we're looking at eastern Harris County over to Chambers County. And Baytown is sort of right in the middle I think you can see Baytown there in the upper left. The Category 1 worst case, okay? So this is a direct hit from a large Cat 1 storm. Remember, Ike was a very, very large Cat 2. And you can see, for the most part, there are some low-lying areas, certainly places like San Leon and parts of Chambers County are already getting a fair amount of water. The height of water above ground level is shown in the table at the bottom. That's feet above ground level. So at this point, Baytown is high enough, usually not too many issues with a Category 1. But if we ramp up to Category 3, this is more like an Ike-type inundation here. Let me see. You can actually see there are some parts of Baytown down near the water that do get storm surge flooding at this level. I do remember surveying the Baytown area after Ike, and sure enough, there were homes near the water there that were really severely damaged from the flow of water at the ground level. And so you can see that there in the Baytown map. Plus, look at our neighbors there in Pasadena, LaPorte, Shore Acres, and then look at Chambers. This is really, really horrific stuff. All the areas in red, greater than 9 feet of seawater above ground. So you get back to that point where, you got to get people out of there, when you have a surge type event. And of course, there's a lot of petrochem in these areas too. So you really worry about the impacts on those as well. And then, God forbid, we get a worst case Cat 5, a large Cat 5. Very low probability to get this level of impact, but it is possible. Think about a large Hurricane Carla, which was it was basically the size of Ike, but a Cat 4. And then, it's just horrific to see the amount of storm surge flooding around the region, including Baytown. So I guess the takeaway message for Baytown is you're higher than many jurisdictions, and so it's going to take a more powerful storm to get seawater into Baytown, but there are more vulnerable areas down near the water. And for a very high-end storm, then storm surge does become a big issue even for Baytown. Of course, it doesn't have to be storm surge flooding. It can be flooding from heavy rain. Texas is known for record amounts of rain. Here are some of the record storms here. Hurricane Harvey, for us, a tropical storm, right, in terms of wind, but it produced 5 feet of rain. That's feet of rain just to our east in Nederland, Texas. Right here in Baytown, we had upwards of 4 feet and greater of rain, about 50 inches, 5-0. And that's a record amount of rain from this type of storm for the continental U.S. Tropical Storm Claudette, 24-hour rainfall record, 43 inches in Alvin, Texas. Again, record-breaking rainfall. And then every step of the way, we get one of these. Allison in 2001 had 40 inches of rain, really impacted this area. And at the time, it was thought that was a once-in-a-lifetime event, right? But since then, Harvey sort of dwarfs Allison and its impacts. And then Imelda didn't impact us as much here in Baytown, but just to our east, they got hit really hard, even as hard as Harvey, or even worse in some cases. And so what we've got here is a rainfall map from some of these big storms that we have. The color scale is all the same, right? So this way you can compare both the scale and size of these rainfall footprints and also the magnitude. And so I want you to start by looking at Allison. When Allison occurred with about 3 feet of rain in Channelview, a lot of people thought that was a once-in-a-lifetime type of rainfall event. Compare that to Harvey. It's almost double the amount of rain over a much, much larger area. So again, unprecedented in how big and powerful that was and how much rain it dumped with those spiral bands feeding up into the area. But just 2 years later, we had Imelda. And as I said, there are parts of Chambers County up into Liberty County that didn't flood from Harvey, that flooded from Imelda. So The bottom line is slow-moving hurricanes and tropical storms. It doesn't take a hurricane, can lead to tremendous amounts of rainfall and flooding in this area. There's so much moisture in the air. Now, kind of something that goes along with this is I really would recommend flood insurance. It's homeowners policy typically doesn't cover damage from flooding. So, I have flood insurance rather, and you can work with your agent on that. Just given how much rain can occur, any place can flood in this area. All right, so let's get to the seasonal forecast. The numbers there, the average numbers are 14 named. That includes hurricanes and tropical storms, 7 hurricanes, 3 major hurricanes, category 3 or greater. Those are the long-term averages. So what are we looking at this year? We have something called an El Nino. And we have a climate oscillation called El Nino Southern Oscillation. And it has 2 phases. El Nino, we have warm water near the equator in the eastern Pacific. In that phase, we tend to have fewer hurricanes in the Atlantic. And you're probably thinking, well, why does that matter? Well, it turns out warmer water in the Pacific means more thunderstorms in that area, which then has impacts on airflow patterns across the globe, including in the Atlantic. So El Nino, more storms. The opposite phase, La Nina. Let me rephrase that. El Nino, fewer storms. La Nina, more storms. La Nina is a more favorable environment in the Atlantic for this development. So what are we looking at this year? Well, last year we had El Nino that actually limited the number of storms to some extent. But we also had very warm ocean water last year, so that sort of overcame the limitations of El Nino. Bottom line is, we ended up with a lot of named storms last year and about average number of hurricanes. This year we have La Nina, so that argues for more storms, but we also have very warm ocean water. Let me explain what we are showing here. The red line shows the heat content of the ocean waters where many of these storms form, out in the Atlantic, the tropical Atlantic. The red line is the current year, and the heat content measure is the y-axis. So what are we looking at here? This year is warmer than any of the last 15 years or so. And if you run the red dot for May 15th over to the blue line, what that tells you is right here in late May, the heat content is more like August 1. You follow me? In the Atlantic. So we have record warmth for the ocean water and a La Nina. So it's not surprising that the forecast is for a very, very active hurricane season. The numbers here from Colorado State, 23 named storms. The average is 14. Forecast is for 11 hurricanes. The average is 7. 5 major hurricanes. The average is 3. Now, NOAA came out with a hurricane forecast just this morning. And as I stand here, I wish I had the numbers in front of me. Maybe I'll have David mention those. But they're very similar to these. I believe 18 to 25 named storms. So with the NOAA forecast, you'll see a range. Would be actually, 18 to 25 named, 8 to 13 hurricanes instead. And so bottom line is, it looks like a very busy season. Will we get hit here? We don't know. It could be a case where all the storms stay out to sea. That would be the best scenario, right? But it only takes one. So the bottom line is our chances of getting hit with more storms to deal with are even higher than average, and we need to prepare now. Now, I did want to put a plug in for my office, the National Weather Service. Our job is to let you know what's coming. So one thing we do is we will do webinars, kind of weather briefings for the emergency managers, for the elected officials, for the Coast Guard, TxDOT, other partners. And our job is to break it down. This happens to be a slide from Harvey. Before any rain had fallen, this is the word we were putting out: potentially devastating flood threat. 15 to 30 inches of rain are likely with local amounts of 40 or more. And so bottom line is, when it comes time to really push the message, we're going to hit it hard. But there are other times we'll say, hey, this doesn't look to be that bad. So it's our job to really let you know. And so the same briefing we give your emergency managers and elected officials, we put out online through social media and on the web. So we want you to stay informed is really what I'm driving at. We also have a new severe weather guide, and you can grab this onto your phone using this QR code if you like. You can load it right up on your phone. Otherwise, you can go to our website, which is weather.gov/Houston, and you could grab it right there. It's linked right up top. We have this in English and Spanish. So if you have Spanish-speaking friends or you are Spanish-speaking yourself and would like to see the same information in Spanish, grab that there. I know David has used this book in the past, and we encourage the jurisdictions to link it to the site, to their websites. Maybe you could share this with your friends or your work group. So, people that dig into this, there's a lot of checklists and preparedness information in here that I haven't covered today. I really encourage you to check that out. And then you can see our social media and our website as well. So I want to open it up now to any questions you may have, either about hurricanes or even the storms from last week. Anything on your mind that you'd like to ask me?
What do you think caused last week's storm to be so intense?
Yeah, great question. I was working in the operations area. The tornado watch comes out at 2 o'clock or so. Basically, we had a lot of wind shear. We had a lot of what's called instability. And so the big question at that time was whether any storm would be able to get itself going to produce damage. Now, along about 4:30, the storm had got itself going. It was producing 70-mile-per-hour winds across Brenham, and it was moving right parallel to 290. So at that point, we knew we were in for a bad, bad storm. And, at the Weather Service, we were putting out tornado warnings, very high-end severe. We were talking about those high 80-mile-per-hour plus winds. So it's kind of a long-winded way of answering, but it's a combination of the instability there, the wind shear in the environment, the tornado watch. When you hear that, that tells you some of those ingredients are there. Then this is just a question of whether some storm will be able to tap into that and get itself going. And it was around 4:30 that finally did happen. Interestingly, there was another very similar storm out near Temple yesterday, Temple, Texas, and that ended up actually winding up into a tornado and then crossing some of our northern areas up near Madisonville. So nationwide, we've had some very intense storms, and the one that plowed right through here was as strong as any of them. Any other questions?
I live about a half a mile south of I-10 near Main Street. My elevation out there is about 32 feet.
Yes, sir.
Okay. My house was built in '84, so it's gone through quite a few hurricanes. I think I'll just ride everything out. Is that a good approach?
Well, let me speak to that generally. You have to assess your risk. How high is your elevation? You mentioned that. If the surge is going to be up near your elevation, then I wouldn't stay. If it's going to be below that, you can check that off. The other thing is, how high a wind can your structure withstand? A lot of homes here are built about Category 1 rated. So if you're looking at a Category 2 or higher, I might consider leaving as well. So it's just a matter of how risky is it and how bad is the storm going to be. If the storm's going to exceed your capability there, I think the safest thing to do is to get out of the way, let the storm come through, and come back. That's really the path of least regret, I think, in general. Mayor.
So let me ask, is there a rule of thumb that you could say, like, if my house was built after 1980, it was built to a certain wind standard? If it was built before that, like Mr. Euler mentioned, then you kind of have an idea of the structure, what it could withstand. Is there kind of a rule, is there kind of a threshold somewhere that you can gauge it for your home and when it was built?
Great question. I honestly don't know the answer. I think maybe the city manager may know. Has to do with building codes and things of that nature. Maybe David has an idea. So I'll kick that one to him because that's a great question. How do you determine what kind of winds your house can withstand? My understanding is the newer homes, after a certain year, which I can't tell you, it's about a Category 1. David, do you know the answer to that?
Yeah, I think the state of Texas as a whole, building code wise, and our planning department is probably the best source of this information. But building wise to wind standards within the state of Texas, we do have lower wind standard requirements within our building codes compared to other states like the state of Florida. That means that our infrastructure isn't built to withstand higher winds above a Category 1. I think you're exactly right. Most infrastructure, residential-wise, within our area only can go up to that Category 1 threshold. Anything above that, you're jeopardizing integrity of your building.
All right, good questions. Anything else?
The evacuation during Rita was a total disaster. Has anything changed to mitigate that disaster?
I think you're ready for our next presentation to talk about evacuation strategies. But I'll address the question right now. There has been, after Ike and Rita, for sure, been changes across the state of Texas on how we address evacuation, particularly how we go in a phased approach within the Houston-Galveston region. So we use our zip codes to evacuate our community, and based on your proximity to the coastline, we'll determine who's going to go first. And that's just because of the sheer size of our region. We're in a huge metroplex. We're surrounded by millions of people. And the only way we can get people out in an orderly fashion is if we follow that phased approach. And we'll talk about it in the next presentation. One thing I'll talk about too, moving forward, is a new traffic study and hurricane evacuation study that is in the works this year that might change some of our planning in the future.
The other thing I want to mention is my understanding is with Rita, people were forced on certain roadways. And my understanding now is you're allowed to take other ones. The state will provide resources along their, sanctioned evacuation routes, but you'll be free. You won't be bound to be on those roadways. You'll be allowed to use other roads as well. Any other quick questions before I hand it over to David? All right. Thank you.
Always been a great partner. Right, so Dan gave you a little bit about the science behind the hazards of hurricanes. As your local emergency manager, I really want to focus in on we're as prepared and resilient as possible. So we'll go through a little bit of what we were talking about hurricane planning wise, how the city prepares itself, as well as how residents can prepare themselves for the next hurricane event. Dan mentioned this earlier about the Atlantic hurricane season. This is the new name set that we're using for 2024. With the current forecast and predictions, it looks like we're going to exhaust this list for another year. There is an alternative list that is available as well. It used to be the Greek alphabet. We moved away from that about a year ago. And so there's an alternate set of names that will be available by NOAA. Dan also mentioned the hurricane season outlook that the Weather Service and NOAA issued just this morning around 9 a.m. And they're predicting a well above normal hurricane season in the Atlantic. Anywhere from 17 to 25 named storms, of which 8 to 13 are going to be hurricanes, and then 4 to 7 major hurricanes are expected. The graphic on your right shows the Colorado State University's hurricane forecast for this year. And I always get this question from everyone. What does Colorado know about hurricanes? And to be honest, they know a lot. A lot of our federal agencies, research institutions are based out of Colorado and the United States Air Force that is there. And so the meteorological assets that they have are world renowned. So Colorado State University is one of the forefront agencies to issue one of the most authoritative reports that's out there. And the Weather Service, a lot of their averages that they issue for their annual report is based off of this one. Colorado State University predicted this hurricane season will see 23 named storms, 11 hurricanes, and 5 major hurricanes. And you can see the average and how that compares. Last year we were at normal, or just above normal. This year we're going to be well above that in terms of the forecast. And this is the reason why. Some of this was covered already as well, but it's because we're going to see a La Nina take effect in the Pacific, meaning the wind shear in the Atlantic is not going to be there anytime we see a storm pop up. It's not going to be torn apart by the wind shear or the trade winds that we see in the Atlantic. The other issue that we're going to see, and we're already seeing this, is the increased temperatures within the Gulf of Mexico, not only at the surface level, but within the depths of water as well. So those two factors alone increased our chances or likelihood of seeing an above average season within the Atlantic. The confidence level from the forecasters is a 70% confidence rate within these reports. So it's highly likely that we would see some type of development in the Gulf of Mexico this hurricane season. But even if it were a normal year or a below average year, it only takes one hurricane to make it an active season. It only takes one for you to be busy within Baytown for post-recovery efforts. So how do we plan for this? The City of Baytown, all of our city departments, we operate on a planning structure that everyone in the state of Texas and most of the Gulf region across the United States use. It's called the H-120 timeline. And you can see on this graphic, most storms, do we know where they develop in the Atlantic? Where do they come from? The coast of Africa. It comes off of waves and storms that are coming off the coast of Africa. And you can see on this timeline, the tip of it here on your right is the H-144 timeline. At that point, we're seeing those waves come off the coast of Africa. As it moves a little further in and we see some development, we have 120 hours to prepare. At that point, most of us in this region use that timeline to start making preparatory efforts. Industry also uses this to make sure that their plants and petrochemical industries are prepared as well. But I'll say this, it's a luxury to have 120 hours to prepare. You saw the tornado or the derecho event that we had. We had maybe at most a couple of hours to prepare. This is a luxury to have 120 hours to prepare. But that's not always the case. Dan also mentioned this as well. We're seeing an increase and a level of intensity increase within storms. And they're not only developing off the coast of Africa, but you saw the little blue dots in his presentation. They're also developing right in the middle of the Gulf. So about 5 to 6 years ago, most of us in this region started to plan for that contingency. We no longer are seeing that long trek hurricane of 120 hours out. We're now preparing for storms that develop right on the tip or right into the Gulf of Mexico that rapidly intensify. And you can see this timeline here cuts our time for preparation down to 48 to even maybe 36 hours of preparation, which shrinks our timeline to make and put things in place, whether it's assets, resources, manpower. We go down from 120 hours to 48 hours, maybe 36 hours, meaning we as city officials, as the mayor, have to make a decision to evacuate pretty quickly if something spins up in the Gulf of Mexico and rapidly intensifies. So what does that mean, to rapidly intensify? It means that that storm has the ability to increase its speeds 35 miles per hour or more within a 24-hour time span. Meaning we can go from something that just looks like a thunderstorm up to a tropical storm or Category 1 hurricane overnight. So that really shrinks our timeline within emergency management. But we have plans in place within the City of Baytown to shrink that timeline and to move assets and to make things happen if we need to. And most emergency management agencies in this area are prepared for this type of contingency. We talked about the evacuation zones. We use our zip codes to evacuate. We use a phased approach. You can see the 4 different colors that are here. The coastline is in our zip zone A, or zip zone coastal. And you can see that's mainly the barrier islands along Bolivar and City of Galveston, the islands. Theoretically, they're the first ones that are going to go and evacuate. They should be calling their evacuation orders well before the City of Baytown. You have more of an inland approach then, where you see the Clear Lake area, the San Leon area, and they're in zip zone A. City of Baytown, we have 3 zip codes, and we're in the last 2 zip codes within that order. That being zip zone C and zip zone B, the green and orange colors. So when we call for a major evacuation of the city, depending on storm surge and wind levels, we would be using those zip codes as well as the orange and green colors that are there, indicating which areas we're evacuating first. On this map, you also see the routes. And there was a change in 2023. Historically, we used 146 all the way up from Galveston past Mount Bellevue. One of the changes that DPS and the Baytown Police Department made last year with the planning partners throughout the region was to have anyone that's coming from Galveston Island and along 146 over the Fred Hartman to now use 99 up to I-10 to evacuate. And you might wonder why, because 99 past I-10 is one single lane, meaning you can't push a lot of people there. But 99 on the south side, near Baytown, near Beach City in that area, it has a little bit more bandwidth to handle traffic. It's just people are gonna have to make a choice once they hit I-10 at Mount Bellevue, whether to continue up 99 to 146 or to continue going left towards I-10. One of the reasons we made this decision was because just the extreme amount of development we've seen along 146. There's more intersections, meaning more manpower and more people that live in that area. And so what we're trying to do is people that are evacuating from the barrier islands on 146 through the Fred Hartman to allow them to use 99 to go up north where they need to and leave State Highway 146, where we have a lot of residents within Baytown, the ability to use that thoroughfare as their main evacuation route out of town. And so, not to say that people that are coming in from 146 can't use it, but we're encouraging them to go 99, so that way we have enough throughput to allow people to leave Baytown as well when we call our evacuation. And the other reason is just manpower. It takes a lot of law enforcement, a lot of barricades to close 146 in a proper way to still allow our residents to move freely within 146. So if we put them on 99, it's less people that we have to assign to those areas, less barricades and resources assigned to that area to manage that evacuation route. So that is one of the big changes that we saw last year with evacuation routes. Other than that change, everything else has remained the same with evacuation routes throughout the region. So here's a closer look at that 99 look, where you can see we made the change there. Instead of going right up 146, we're trying to use 99 like a loop, kind of like 330 as a spur. We always get a question about contraflow. Will contraflow exist here in Baytown? The answer is absolutely not. Evacuation in contraflow does not exist in Harris County or Chambers County. Contraflow does not start until we're well outside of our major metroplex area, simply because we're shutting down 2 ways of travel. It requires a lot of manpower. It's a last resort effort. It takes a lot of TxDOT expertise to make that work. And it just will not happen within the greater Houston area, because we have a lot of loops, right? We have 99, we have 610, we have Beltway 8. You can't close those down in one direction. So we do not have contraflow within our area. That actually starts about 2 or 3 counties outside the greater Houston area to make that happen. Register with STEER, so transportation assistance. If you know someone that does not have a vehicle or adequate transportation to evacuate the region, please make sure that they're registered in this system, the State of Texas Emergency Assistance Registry. You can call 211 and register on that system, or you can visit their website at the State of Texas to register for this. We use this not only for transportation assistance, but if you have someone in your family that's elderly, is on a durable medical equipment, or maybe has an intellectual or mental health disability, you can register them into the system, and give us some information on some of those attributes. We use this information not only to provide transportation assistance to evacuate during a hurricane, but now under state law, we're required to conduct wellness checks during major utility outages, whether it's water, gas, or power outages. So actually during this last incident that we went through, this windstorm, we implemented our steer plan and conducted wellness checks using our fire and police officers on this list. So if you know someone that needed help during this last disaster, please make sure they're on this list, and then we can automatically put them there, give them an alert. We'll use Baytown Alert, send out a text message to them, ask them if they want a wellness check or if they're okay. They can respond yes or no. If they do respond yes, we'll send someone out. If they respond no and we can't get a hold of them after a couple of times, we'll send out a first responder to go and check on that family member. The embarkation hub. So those that are registered in that steer system, if they say they need transportation assistance, we open up basically a Greyhound depot. Anybody remember Greyhound?
Yeah.
They still exist. But the city becomes Greyhound basically for those who need a ride outside of the evacuation zones. So the city coordinates with the state of Texas, the Texas Military Department, the police department here in Baytown to open up a transportation hub. So we request to the state of Texas, we need 20 to maybe 30 buses, charter buses, to come here. They stage them. We start wristbanding people, and we get them tracked into what we call the Evacuation Tracking Network, ETN. Those individuals then board the bus and are evacuated either to Austin, San Antonio, or the DFW area. And they go there, and then they're brought back.
What do they do when they get there?
So when they get there, there's a reception center that is going to receive them. And there's options there once they get there. If they have their own means, they're free to go and provide their own shelter, whether it's a rental, a hotel or something, family members that are there. Or there's actually long-term shelters that will be established in those locations where people can stay.
Do y'all have agreements with some of these retirement facilities and things there? Because I know some of the people there don't have families that are in immediate areas.
Yeah, so long-term care facilities, we work with them as well. We're one of the few cities that have a city ordinance in place to review the local long-term care facilities, review their emergency plans on an annual basis. Part of that requirement is we have them submit to us their transportation plan or transportation agreements. We do have some facilities that don't have a transportation contract, but we have them outline what is their strategy, whether it's their family members picking it up or it's their facility-owned assets that are evacuating their patients.
So we represent a long-term care facility here in Baytown. And going through this, my question about, you were talking about traffic flow during evacuation. Part of our plan that we submit to you guys is we have 3 sister facilities in the greater Houston area that we would evacuate to. But what if the routes are cut down and we can't get our people to our sister facilities? That's my question, is I'm trying to think around that.
I mean, if it becomes that, it's an evacuation. You should be evacuating before any of these
Okay.
DPS. DPS might, when we call in DPS to help sometimes, and this is where Harvey mentioned this as well, we've had some issues where DPS will block certain areas because they're just not familiar with the region.
Right.
If that does become a problem, I'd say coordinate with your local emergency management office. We probably can then provide either a state asset or a local asset that can maybe escort you and
Yeah,
your
it was just,
facility out.
when you were talking about it, I was like, okay, if we know we gotta go, what if the route getting to the sister facility that we're supposed to evacuate to is shut down or whatever, so, okay.
Yeah, and that you're perfectly right. There's other institutions where they would evacuate to, so we actually outlined that as well, where they're going to take their patients to. Question?
Yes. At what point do you check on those patients by sending the text or sending somebody out? What has to happen in order for that steer part to take place?
Yeah, so the law is actually very vague on it. It's only been around since the last legislative session. And there's been some implementation guide issued by the Texas Division of Emergency Management. But the law requires, if we know that there's going to be an outage 24 hours or longer for us to actually implement that process. It doesn't say when the 24 hours starts though. Is it upon disaster declaration? Is it whenever you find out that the utility is going to be out for 24 hours? Is it after the 24 hours of being without power? So there's some critical decisions we have to make. As soon as we knew that we were going to have a major prolonged outage, we started implementing this plan and brought together all of our first response agencies to operationalize it. So we issued our STEER data registry. We put it into our alert system. We dwindled down the list because some of these are every long-term care facility in the state of Texas is required to register into the system under state regulatory requirements. So those individuals we know already are in the care of that administrator of that facility. So they automatically come off the list for first responders because they're in the care of someone that's a state licensed facility. Then we worry about the people who aren't under care of any professional. So those are the ones we're targeting that are in their house, within their residence, that may not have anybody caring for them in the long term. And so we make those house-to-house knocks on those facilities. And we give first an opportunity through our alert system for them to respond back in the survey whether they need the assistance or not. And then if they don't respond to that first electronic call, under the law we're then required to do a physical call. So someone actually has to call that individual up and try to make contact. After that second contact, if they don't respond or if they do need assistance, we'll conduct a wellness check.
I have a question, and I may have missed this, you may have said it already. We have a lady in our neighborhood that lives alone and is pretty well confined to her house.
Mm-hmm.
So is there any point in registering her with something like this now so you all know she's there, or do we wait until, what might we do?
Yeah, if someone you know is like homebound, they're oxygen dependent, register them into the system.
Okay.
The other thing I would say is call our non-emergency number for our 911 center. And our dispatch system, you can tag that address and notate those kind of things. So that way our EMS can know ahead of time. And when we do implement these type of protocols, they can know already and have it pre-designated.
And what kind of time span is it between the electronic contact, the telephone contact, and you going out there? Because if your electricity is out, and she doesn't do email anyway, so she would not respond to that. Her landline is out, she's not going to respond to that. So what kind of time are you looking at from the first contact to actually going out and checking on her?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And I'm not going to pinpoint myself down on it either, because it really depends on the list. The list we get fluctuates day to day. So we only upload our system every quarter or so because it's a lot of data. And if you don't re-register every year, you're automatically off the list. So you got to register yourself every year to make sure that it's as current as possible. And it just depends on what kind of response we have, whether they're responding through the survey, they're responding through a phone call or an email. Just depends. So as soon as we get as much information as that as we can, we start to go to the physical phone calls. All of this in this last incident was done probably within about, we had the email go out, the survey. I'd say we then did the physical calls maybe about an hour later.
Oh, okay, you're talking hours.
And then within that hour, we're done with the physical calls, another hour. And then we started doing the wellness checks after
Okay,
that.
you're not talking days, you're talking hours.
Yeah, it
Okay.
has to be hours, but if not, what's the point of doing the
Right,
wellness check?
okay.
Yeah.
One more question about the evacuation. So with 211, if you're helping them evacuate to those larger cities, is there a way to know where they're going to?
So that is very hard to pinpoint because it depends on what the state activates at that time. So, and each bus may not go to the same exact location. So as we get charter buses and where they're actually chartered to go, it's just we know whenever they get here. So we may not necessarily know if they're going to DFW or Austin or San Antonio. It depends on when the state activates those reception centers, and then whatever buses they send us, they're chartered to go to a certain place.
So how would the family members left behind know?
So they
where
try to
their
group
loved
the
ones-
family members together
Okay.
when they board a bus.
Are residents that are under the care of home health agencies or hospice agencies, are they lumped in the same category as the long-term care? They're taken off the list?
Some of them, it just depends. If they're hospice care at the house, they would be on the list. And those are, I think we had quite a few people that were on the wellness check as well.
Okay.
I live in an apartment with a lot of seniors, so this is wonderful to give the manager. There's one gentleman who used to call all the time, and I had the key, give it to the EMS. Finally, I'm like, I can't get up. So if he's registered with STEER, I'm thinking of not burdening the EMS people. If people know he's registered with STEER, I'm just thinking they'd confuse the issue if they called 911 also, the non-emergency. So is it necessary to call the non-emergency if they're registered with STEER? Do you understand my question?
It's just a double feature that you could have. I would say for other non-emergencies that may not be a disaster, it's good information for our first responders to have. If it's just in our STEER database, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to go automatically to 911 because it's something we use in major disasters only, not daily
No, but
emergencies.
say for example, I'm watching TV and it's like, oh, something's going on and I'm worried about this old man who falls all the time. So I would call the non-emergency and say, hey, I'm a neighbor and I'm concerned about him. But I feel like I'd be taxing the system doing the double. STEER would do it automatically.
Yes, STEER would do it automatically for the wellness check
We're
requirement.
worried about everybody else, and then it's kind of like as an afterthought, like, oh, we forgot about Mark, but he's taken care of if he's registered with STEER.
I would say if you ever have a concern about someone's well-being, it's never a bad idea to call and ask for a wellness check. Even during the middle of a disaster, we know resources are going to be taxed, but that's information that we want our first responders, if they can respond to it.
But also just, we're gonna be so busy with our we're not thinking about the neighbors who, because
Yeah.
it's just kind of become commonplace, so now you don't blink when they come to, but.
Yeah, if you can
just-
pre-identify someone that needs help or may need help during a disaster, it's always great to do that ahead of time.
But if we forget to relieve our own guilt,
Yeah.
I'm saying he will be taken care of if we don't remember until we get to Dallas or.
Yes, they should be called if they're registered on that
Okay.
system, and they make the list within that 1 year cutoff.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
So we have other resources that are in place within the fire department and the police department that help us during rescue operations. So if we do get into a situation where we have flooding due to heavy precipitation as well as storm surge, we have a very large fleet comparatively to other jurisdictions around us. We have 8 high water vehicles within the fire department, so every station has a high water vehicle, and then we have an extra one at fire administration or the fire shop. And police department, they have 4 high water vehicles as well to assist in rescue operations. Also, some of our industrial partners as well have some high water vehicles, and if we need to use those or vice versa, we provide mutual aid to each other. Shelter and mass care, we get this question a lot. We do not open shelters during or before landfall of a hurricane. Our strategy within our region is to evacuate from the water and hide from the wind. Shelters during a hurricane situation only open post-disaster once the winds have died down, once the water has gone down, and as we make re-entry into the area and people are coming back. If there's a housing need, we'll open up shelters for an emergency situation. Most of our shelters here are only opened up as a temporary emergency shelter, meaning for less than 72 hours. If we go anything past that where there's a major need for long-term care sheltering, we usually coordinate that at the regional level with Harris County and Chambers County to provide a longer-term solution for residents that are displaced. There's a lot of changes have happened this year as well under the Individual Assistance Program for FEMA, where they provide temporary sheltering assistance or TSA assistance, where they'll reimburse you for rental cost to shelter in a hotel. Points of distribution. Every major event that has happened since I've been here has had some kind of distribution of one sort or another. But we do have pre-designated points of distribution or pod locations throughout the city where we would provide MREs, food, water, and ice for residents. And you can see here the mayor and a couple of other of our public works department. We also have our police department there providing different food and assistance to help residents post-disaster. So here's one of our latest graphics on hurricane preparedness. We always recommend everyone register for our Baytown alert system. And that's how we communicate our official warnings and alerts to the community. And then we always encourage everyone to implement mitigation measures for their home on how you can protect your property. Whether that's covering windows through storm shutters, trimming your trees, as we saw, that's probably one of the biggest maintenance things you can do to protect your property. And then we're securing any outdoor items and moving vehicles to higher ground. One thing I would say about moving vehicles to higher ground, if you know your area floods and you're in a low-lying area, do that well before you start seeing that water level go up. And if not, you're going to put yourself at risk, and then we're conducting rescue operations at that point. So you want to move your vehicle ahead of time. Pack an emergency kit, and we'll get into some details about that. One thing I can't stress enough is check your insurance. Make sure that you have a flood insurance policy. I believe in Harris and Chambers County, we only have about 30% of our residential properties that are insured, even though we have one of the highest flood risks in the U.S. So we want to make sure that you check your insurance policy. And remember, your flood insurance policy takes 30 days to take effect. So it's not an instant policy when you go online and pay for it. The other thing to keep in mind, if we have a named storm in the Gulf of Mexico, most of these insurance agencies are not going to issue an insurance policy. So check that ahead of time before we get into hurricane season to make sure you have adequate coverage. The other thing is know your evacuation routes. We talked a little bit about some of the changes. Make sure you know how you're going to get out of the community if you need to evacuate your family. We made some upgrades to our website last year. Please visit us at baytown.org/preparedness, and we provide a multitude of information for the whole community, including individuals with disabilities, items that are child appropriate, information for older adults, how to keep your animals and pets prepared, and then of course hurricane preparedness, and we also have a tab up there for chemical emergency. So visit us at baytown.org/preparedness. Also, you see the QR code there. Baytown, we have a newly designed Baytown disaster guide that goes through all hazards that might be susceptible here in the Baytown area. And I want to thank our Public Information Officer, Casey Cook. She helped develop that and helped design the graphics in that document. Supply kit. Everyone always asks, do we really need an emergency kit? And the answer is, you wish you had that emergency kit last week, right?
Right.
We always used to say that your disaster preparedness kit should only be 3 days. We now are saying 7 to 10 days, right? And that was evidenced through this week with our power outages lasting up to a week. Make sure that your disaster preparedness kit has enough food, water, supplies that you need to sustain you and your family for up to 7 to 10 days. This is actually inside of that preparedness guide you can download. And most of you have a copy now in your packet that you received. Make sure that your kit also includes items for your pets and animals. They are your family members, they are your responsibility legally under state law as well. So make sure that you have them prepared. You have food, water, medicine, some type of identification. And if you're evacuating with your pet, please make sure you have a crate with you as well. So that way you can properly house them through that travel. I want to touch this very quickly for those of you that might have friends or family that have been impacted by the recent storms. We are declared for individual assistance by FEMA. If you know anyone that was impacted by the storm, whether their house suffered physical damage or whether they suffered any kind of losses from food, appliances, generators, whatever it might be, please make sure that they go and apply for assistance under FEMA at disasterassistance.gov. And they can register and see if they qualify or are eligible for assistance. They are providing serious need assistance. That's a new change this year for the IA program, individual assistance program. Serious needs is $750 for immediate needs that FEMA can put into your pocket right away to help you for your emerging needs right now. And then they'll assess what other damages you're eligible for under that FEMA claim process. The other thing is we are SBA declared as well. So that means any of your small businesses or your homes for residential improvements and repairs can apply for an SBA low-interest loan. Very beneficial for the community to know about that one. And then any unmet needs that you might have that aren't covered by these other federal programs, you can always call 211 in our local United Way, and they help coordinate with other nonprofits to provide disaster relief. They also serve as our long-term recovery committee and are very instrumental in the long term. Any questions about the assistance programs or disaster relief programs? Everybody knows the FEMA process. All right. Well, I'm not going to keep you much longer. This is all I have as our last slide, is to stay informed. Like I said earlier, the best way to keep informed by the City of Baytown for emergencies is to register for our alerting program, Baytown Alert. And simple website address is baytown.org/alert. And you can register for the alerting system to receive text message, email, or phone calls. And we have a whole multitude of other alerting systems. We even have an AM alert radio station that can be used during major evacuations and traffic alerts that we have. So keep that in mind as well. You can always tune in to 1610 AM. All right, with that, anybody have any other questions?
Can you say a few words about the new policy on the use of sirens?
Oh, yes, I did remember that. We did activate our sirens for this actual tornado warning that was issued.
Yeah.
That is a major change in policy for the City of Baytown. After our 2023 tornado incident, a lot of our local emergency managers in the southeast side of Harris County met. We have a meeting group, an EMC working group that we meet on a monthly basis. And we adopted some new policies on the use of our sirens, that anytime we have a warning, a tornado warning within our jurisdictions, we now use our chemical warning sirens also as tornado sirens to keep the community informed and to make sure they can take appropriate protective measures and shelter as needed. So that was a big change. And we are going to make more of a concerted effort to communicate that out into the community within that policy change that's just a year old.
So that strange sound we heard from Exxon from the Exxon area was that their siren, or was that that was strange.
So we have about 20 different sirens across the City of Baytown
Yeah.
that are activated.
Yeah.
They're not the sirens that are in the fence line within ExxonMobil.
Well, I don't know what we heard then.
Where are you
Do you
located?
hear the siren every
On
Wednesday
Bush Road?
morning? Do you hear a siren every Wednesday morning? Those are the ones that
It's the
went
same
off.
Oh, we all,
sirens.
yeah, no, then that was some other strange siren then.
Yeah, they sound they're on for a longer time during a real emergency. On every Wednesday, we have it set for
Yes.
like 60 seconds or less.
And we're
The
familiar with
volume,
that
I mean,
one.
it was just ear piercing.
It was amplified.
That's a very clean
good.
siren at 9 o'clock on Wednesdays. We all know that one. So this was an odd, I don't know,
Yes.
it must have just been specific to the plant, I guess.
I'm not sure. It could be that one of our sirens was damaged as well with the windstorm, and that could affect the signal as well.
Well, it got your attention.
It got my attention.
Had no idea what it was.
It was a surprise.
It was a surprise, yes.
David, is that siren accompanied with an alert?
Ma'am?
Does an alert go off as well? Like a City of
Yes.
Baytown alert went off with that siren as well?
So as soon as our alert, they're simultaneously linked together automatically. As soon as the Weather Service issues a warning for a tornado that's a polygon within our area, so if it hits any area of Baytown, our sirens will automatically activate along with Baytown Alert, sends out an alert to shelter as
Yeah,
well.
we got that.
And then we followed up that with a second message through Baytown Alert to make sure people were following
We
up.
got a
with
phone
that.
call too, so we
And a
got
phone call,
a
yes,
text
ma'am.
and a phone call.
Text.
Yeah. Yeah.
David, I apologize if you already addressed this, I got to come in late. On the warning and watch, you said this is issued for a warning, is a watch? Now, is that, a warning is if there's been one spotted, or it's just there's conditions that are present for one to be formed, and a watch is where one has been spotted, or is that?
Yeah, so let me touch that, and I'll put it in very simple terms.
Because I know it kind of.
It is
Well,
confusing.
it goes hand in hand with hurricane, what hurricane watch and hurricane
Yes, sir.
warning.
Yes, sir.
There's-
Same thing with the watch and warning, no matter what the hazard is. The best way to think about this, you saw the cat analogy earlier with hurricanes. Think about it in terms of tacos. And we all like tacos, right?
Yep.
Well, most of us. A watch means you have all the ingredients to make a taco. Doesn't mean that they've come together yet to actually create the taco. There's no tornado yet. There's no hurricane yet. But all the ingredients are there to make it happen. That's what a watch is. You have to be prepared, you have to be ready to make sure that you can take any protective measure you need to if it all comes together. The warning means it's either been indicated on radar or it's been spotted. So there actually is a threat that needs to be responded to. One is preparation, the other one is you're responding to actually implement your protective measures. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah.
Did.
All right. Anybody else? All right. Well, thank you again for being here for our annual hurricane workshop. We appreciate you. If there's anything you need from the Baytown Office of Emergency Management or the fire department, please let us know. We're always here to help and available if you need us.
It's a slideshow that either one of you, is that on the Baytown website?
It's not currently on the website, but we are recording the session, so it'll be available, and we'll make that
We'd
available.
like to show that to some people.
Yes, ma'am.
Are these
Yes.
They were gonna be your prizes, so I.
If you haven't got a bag, please take one. We have more around the table as well, and there's plenty of snacks.